Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees.
Good evening and greetings to all of you who are joining the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice Town Hall panel discussion on hate crimes, hate groups, and our need to assure our state citizens and residents that our hate crime laws offer them sufficient protection and redress. I find it interesting and significant that we are having this critical town hall in the midst of major periods of reflection, reaffirmation, and reminders of the major tenets of our three major religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Passover begins this coming Friday. Easter follows 2 days later. And Ramadan, the fasting ritual similar to Christian Lent, is in process now and will continue until early May. Despite the corrosive damage that we as followers of one of these religions have done in the misinterpretation and misuse of the tenets found within them, these rivaling major religions preach a similar message. A common message in all three of the scriptures is that, quote, hate darkens life, love illuminates it. The Bible says, for example, quote, love one another. The Quran says, serve Allah and do good to parents, kinsfolk, orphans, those in need, neighbors who are near, neighbors who are strangers, the companion by your side, the wayfarer. And an interpreter of the Talmud says, quote, love is the gravity that pulls the universe together. Hatred is the antimatter that pulls it apart. A more contemporary prophet, Martin Luther King, said, hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. He also said that hate paralyzes life. Love releases it. And let me add a more contemporary quote, and that comes from the co-chair of the Alliance, Don Peterson, who reminds us that love takes courage. However, so many of our species seem to have an aversion to love and a compulsive attraction to hate, as evidenced in the increase of hate groups and hate crimes each year. In 2020, the FBI documented 7,759 hate crimes, a 6% increase over 2019. Another FBI report noted 8,263 hate crimes in 2021. In 2021, the Southern Poverty Law Center tracked 733 hate groups across the United States. Only 4 hate groups were tracked in Delaware, but then reporting on such crimes or the lack thereof is an issue in our state. Data drives policy. Policy drives change. We need our state legislators and our state leaders to carry the message forward that hate crimes will not be able to flourish in our state and bring injury, damage, and death to our citizens. Let us get to the wonderful and knowledgeable panel that is with us tonight. I am pleased to introduce our moderator for the evening, Lori Shulman-Yadid, an educator and community organizer whose work and research focuses on the impact of lived experiences, human development, nature, and condition, and the benefit of building an intentional, benevolent community. Currently, Lori's focus is growing her nonprofit organization, Create Safe Space Incorporated, and its newest initiative, Delawareans for a Benevolent Community, based on the teachings of our wise ancestors who spoke of love as the major weapon. Since moving to Delaware, Lori has become an active volunteer with the League of Women Voters, who is our co-sponsor tonight, and the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice. Lori's greatest joy is found with her children and grandchildren. She was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and now calls a 100-year-old farmhouse in Milton, Delaware, home. It's my pleasure to turn this meeting over to Lori.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for always illuminating and beautiful words and for that kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. I will not say that I'm an expert. I'm just a navigator. The experts are on our panel, and we are so fortunate to have some really amazing social justice warriors with us tonight. I want to thank the leadership of our sponsors, the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice and the League of Women Voters Sussex County, for their commitment in creating important and insightful educational forums such as this one. This particular event feels close to me, as it addresses a topic that I have unfortunate experience with. I am grateful to our panelists their work to inform Delawareans about hate crimes, their efforts to enlighten us about the many hate groups across the nation and state, and their campaign to report hate incidents and to update Delaware state laws so to enable our law enforcement to prosecute hate crimes is critically important to our individual and community safety. Tonight, each of our speakers will have the opportunity to speak to us about their valuable work. I will provide a brief introduction to each presenter, and when all have shared with us, I will present a series of questions that were written by SDARJ volunteers for this evening. As you know, one note is as our Honorable Attorney General Kathleen Jennings must leave the call at 8 o'clock. When she presents, I will share a couple questions with her so that she has an opportunity to be a part of that segment of our evening. If members of our esteemed audience have questions, please write them in the chat. While we may not get to them this evening, we will provide them to our guests for written remarks, which we can share following this event. So without further ado, our first presenter is Calum Farley. Calum is an investigative researcher with the Anti-Defamation League Center on Extremism, where he monitors neo-Nazi extremism with a particular focus on the accelerationist movement. He frequently represents ADL in briefings and trainings with law enforcement and community organizations. Prior to joining the ADL, he completed his master's degree with honors from, I think, oh, there we go. Sorry about that, Masaryk University in the Czech Republic, where he studied non-state conflict and democratic institutions. And it is with pleasure that I turn the Zoom call over to Calum.
All right, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me here and that introduction. So I kind of just want to go over for you guys what it is that we do at the Center on Extremism and kind of how that ties into our reporting and monitoring hate crimes, both in Delaware as well as nationally. There we go. So just to start off with, the goal of the ADL Center on Extremism is to not only understand how extremists operate, their tactics and exploiting of social media, but to find ways to mitigate and push back on these threats that are making headlines every single day. We do this in various ways. This is through providing actionable and timely information about extremist activity and plans to law enforcement, as well as training on local, state, and federal levels. We share data and analysis with the tech industry as well, who have the most advanced technology, but still rely on us for the human expertise that is required to identify hate in all of its ugly and mutating forms. And so just to give you guys an example, these are all images that I have found personally from the work that I do on a daily basis, just going through in online spaces, finding out where these groups are acting, where they're talking to each other, where they're recruiting new members. And what's really shocking is that, or what's remarkable about this is from our space, just how unremarkable it is. Every day we see thousands of posts just like these. And while most of these posts are made by people who won't ever actually do anything, it is still deeply concerning because the people are constantly consuming this type of messaging. And that tells them that there are problems in the world and the only way to fix it through violence. So a big role for us becomes trying to figure out what that line is between someone who is just posting and someone who's just talking online, and the individuals who want to seek out what it is they're talking about online and carry that over into a physical space. And so kind of in our way of bringing that out and making the public more aware of what we're doing in these sort of actual steps, the COE produces major reports on a variety of topics, including in-depth analysis of extremist groups and movements. This is from the Islamic State to prison gangs, and from the sovereign citizen movement to the Ku Klux Klan. And our reports are a widely used source. In some cases, the reports identify new trends, or they provide some sort of statistical analysis. So we've also partnered internationally with certain groups to look at really the scope of trends like white supremacy, which is a movement that honestly is not something that's restricted by borders, but is much more global in scope. We much more recently reported, as you can see there on the bottom, our murder and extremism report. This is something we report annually to look at violence within the US and looking at the trends behind it, whether it's left-wing extremism, right-wing extremism, and what is it that is bringing these individuals to violence, and seeing what trends are going on in these spaces. So those are just some examples. And then on a more day-to-day, we also write stories on recent trends and incidents. So you can see here, these are all stories that we've posted recently. One of them, I wrote the one actually on the top, with white supremacists and other extremists respond to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I've been following that space. We've also had individuals who have talked about the ongoing trucker convoy that came to DC. We're constantly following elected officials like Marjorie Taylor Greene for extremism and what the kind of points that they're espousing, and also unmasking people behind these sort of conspiracies and trends online. On the bottom right, unmasking an individual who was actually behind a conspiracy about biolabs being used in Ukraine. And then we also have a series of backgrounders. So the close monitoring of extremist groups and individuals gives us insight into the most active groups within the US. So we use our knowledge to develop backgrounders on these groups. Each backgrounder not only explains each group's origins, their leadership and activity, but also their ideological goals and aspirations. And these backgrounders are widely quoted by news sources when these groups come to the media's attention. And moreover, these backgrounders are fully open to the public. So all these resources I'm showing you right now are things that you can easily find on our website. And the next things I'm going to show you are also readily available. One of the resources that I'm a big fan of, and I think is really good to get an idea of the space, both nationally as well as here in Delaware, is our ADL heat map. So this is a first of its kind, interactive and customizable map detailing hate, extremism, and anti-Semitic incidents by state and nationwide. So we developed this unique visualization using data points from information sources, including news reports, government documents, which include police reports, victim reports, extremist-related sources that we're monitoring on a daily basis, Center on Extremism investigations, and more. And so when you go onto our website and you look at this map, it is fully interactive. You can zoom in, zoom out, look around. You can click on each of these smaller data points, and you'll actually be able to get a kind of a summary of what the incident was. So if I zoom in here for Delaware, you can see that for the year of 2021, we recorded 60 incidents. And on the bottom there, you can see this is just an example of what one of the incidents were. So we see here that it was a propaganda piece that was posted. It was specifically from the white supremacist group Patriot Front. And so it just gives you a really good idea of seeing what's going on in your community. I will tell you this map is updated monthly. And so already for 2022, we have recorded 30 incidents within Delaware. The majority of these have been white supremacist propaganda. So finding people posting flyers or stickers or that sort of thing. Another resource we have is our Hate on Display database. This began in the year 2000, and we are currently up to 214 different symbols. And so within this resource, you can look at all these different symbols. And when you click on each one, you'll be given a definition of what the symbol is, what it represents, any groups that it can be linked to, and other examples of it, and with real life pictures. And so this becomes really advantageous when trying to look through individuals like this, or things you might find on the street, posters, flyers, things like that, to kind of understand what it is that you're looking at or seeing. Is this a group I don't need to be worried about? Or is this something I should be worried about, and maybe pass it along to my local law enforcement, or pass it on to a community organization or community leaders? The importance with imagery is that within these movements, symbolism is extremely important. For these groups, they run a kind of a double-edged sword where they want to be well known and they want to spread their message, but at the same time, they understand that their message and their ideology is, for the most part, vile and hated by a majority of the community. And so what they're trying to do is find a way where they can reach out and reach out to other members within their communities, while also making sure that they're not scaring off, or they're not intimidating, or creating undue attention to themselves. And so that really is the important in the symbolism, and that's why I believe our display database is very important. So going on from the public side of things to more of the private side of things and what we do on the other side, unfortunately, it's not enough to just educate the public, but we also have to try and disrupt extremism too as it happens. And so here is another map we have. This is a part of our heat map, and this is showing actual extremist plots and murders from the years of 2020 and 2021. And so we can see nationally there were 60 incidents of either plots that were thwarted or did happen, or violence that did occur that had an extremist or an ideological kind of like motivation to it. And so what do we do in these instances? Well, one of the big things that the COE is working with law enforcement. We provide hundreds of assists to law enforcement agencies every year at the federal, state, and local levels. And this includes briefings and trainings. This includes alerting law enforcement departments about events that we find that might be upcoming. We also provide expert witness testimony at trials, and we help with ongoing investigations. And so just to kind of give you an idea, and then I'll be finished with my little spiel here, 2 incidents where we were able to actually work on and help thwarting an individual in real life. So the first example here, this is an individual whose name is Corbin Kaufman. And so on March 28th, 2019, we reported this individual to the local police, law enforcement for, as you can see here, the posts that he was making online. In specific, these posts were done as a reaction to the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so by looking through his social media kind of profile, we were able to find out who the individual was and where he was living. We passed that on to law enforcement, and on April 1st, 2019, so not 3 days later, he was arrested and charged with interstate transmission of threats to injure a person. And so this is then the article that we wrote about it. Eventually, we were able to work with law enforcement, and on July of 2021, Kaufman was sentenced to 18 months in prison for threats to the Jewish community. And so the second example then I want to give you of what we've been able to work on is this is an individual, Paul Miller. He also goes by the name Gypsy Crusader, and he was an online streamer. And so as Miller would run his online streams, he would go through certain chat rooms and was espousing his white supremacist ideology. And as ADL noticed, he was becoming increasingly radical both online and in real life through posting of stickers and flyers and posters and that sort of thing. We reported him to the New Jersey-based law enforcement in October of 2020. We also reported to law enforcement that he was actually moving. In October of 2020, he moved from New Jersey down to Florida. And we tracked him his entire way down there. We tracked where he moved to in Florida in November. And so eventually we were contacted by the FBI, and we helped them with their investigation into him, where we found out that Paul Miller was actually a convicted felon. And we had pictures of him brandishing a firearm. And so in March of 2020, we were able to assist in the FBI arrest of Paul Miller, a convicted felon, who was then indicted for possessing a gun as a convicted felon. In addition to that, in June of 2021, Miller pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 41 months in prison, which is being followed by 3 years of supervised release. So this is just another example of the work that we're able to do to really disrupt these individuals, not only in violence that they might be able to enact in the real world, but also the fact that they're currently being able to espouse their message and radicalize other individuals. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Callum. I so appreciate the work that you and your colleagues are doing with the ADL. There is amazing value and need for us to especially be tracking groups and individuals who both message hate and act upon hate. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is the Honorable Delaware State Attorney General Kathleen Jennings. Attorney General Jennings was sworn in on January 1st, 2019, and serves as Delaware's 46th Attorney General. Born and raised in Wilmington, Kathy graduated from Mount Pleasant High School, University of Delaware, and Villanova University Law School before joining the Department of Justice. As a prosecutor for the Delaware Department of Justice, Kathy prosecuted scores of domestic violence, sexual assault, and homicide cases. She worked with fellow prosecutor Pete Latang, the FBI, Newcastle County, and Delaware State Police to identify, arrest, and prosecute a serial killer who tortured and murdered 5 women. This case marked the first time that DNA analysis was admitted into evidence in a Delaware court. After a time in private practice, Kathy returned to the Delaware Department of Justice in 2011 to serve as state prosecutor under Attorney General Beau Biden and later under Attorney General Matt Dehn. Under their leadership, Kathy successfully sought legislation to end mandatory life sentences for people convicted of drug crimes and to restore driving privileges for people with drug convictions to enable them to work. During her tenure, Kathy worked with others to form the Crime Strategies Unit, whose focus is to engage with communities hardest hit by violent crime and blight to solve problems and restore trust. In 2019, Kathy turned the Crime Strategies Unit into the Community Engagement Unit. Kathy also worked with police chiefs to formulate Delaware's model policy for police-worn body cameras and secure funds to provide the life-saving drug Narcan to police agencies statewide. In January of 2017, Kathy was appointed Chief Administrative Officer of Newcastle County by County Executive Matthew Meyer. As the county's second in command, Kathy managed more than 1,500 employees and a budget of $284 million. During that time, Kathy concurrently served as the county's public safety director, overseeing the Newcastle County Police Department, paramedics, and communications, and 911 communications. As Delaware's Attorney General, Kathleen Jennings is focused on making Delaware a safer place to live and raise our children, making the justice system fair and equal for everyone, and combating the opioid pandemic. Kathy has 2 adult children, a daughter who lives in Wilmington and a son who lives in Baltimore. Welcome, Madam Attorney General Kathleen Jennings.
Wow, Lori, I don't know what to say after that. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And Callum, thank you for the work you do with the ADL. It is vitally important to our democracy, and it is an honor to be among all of you this evening. I want to also introduce speaker this evening, Deputy Attorney General Nicole Mosey, who joined our office's Division of Civil Rights and Public Trust. It is such an honor to talk with you tonight. There are experts among us who know a lot about hate. And one thing I do know from my work over the years as a defense attorney, as a prosecutor, as a public servant, and as a human being, quite frankly, is that hate has existed among us for as long as humans have existed on this earth. But what I see now is quite frightening. You know, in my own lifetime, we have seen hate manifest itself in so many horrific, destructive ways. When I was a little kid, my mom was quite frankly appalled and decided that she was going to learn everything she could about genocide in Nazi Germany. And I remember picking up this book. It was about Adolf Eichmann, and thinking this could not have happened, yet it did. And as I grew older and learned about the murder of 4 little children in Birmingham, Alabama, in a church, and all of the lynchings that have occurred in this country, I decided that whatever I did with my life, one of the things I had to do was to combat hate in our world. It is just impossible for us as public servants to make any progress in our state, in our districts, and in our nation unless we deeply commit to combating hate in our lifetime. Because it exists to this day, there is no mistake about it. Charlotte King, your presentation was so deeply moving and important for us all to not only remember the horrific instances of hate in our country, but to know that there is a different way, that there can be light, and that there can be peace and understanding. I know that the Division of Civil Rights and Public Trust has truly been the hallmark of our achievements within the Attorney General's office. We sought legislation very soon after I took office to make the Office of Civil Rights a division, which means that long after I am gone and everyone else in our office has moved on, there will be a division of civil rights and public trust. And we have great people in our office to thank for that. We have Senator Pinckney to thank for that, as well as so many other legislators who led the fight to create the Division of Civil Rights and Public Trust, and the legislation that has followed in our state and that exists today as we attempt to make hate crimes more modern, more prosecutable, and a permanent institution as well in our state prosecution function. Let me say that the Division of Civil Rights and Public Trust has just done a phenomenal job. They have taken their job extremely seriously. There is legislation right now that will modernize our hate crime law. And thank you, Senator Pinckney, who is leading the charge on that as the prime sponsor in the Senate for that hate crime bill. I am confident that it will become law before June 30th. There is also a huge effort to make sure that civil rights in our state are protected. And there is a bill that is making its way through the legislature as well that will criminalize the deprivation of civil rights and provide our office with the authority to prosecute. That's vitally important as well. I am so grateful for the work that Nicole and her team are doing, but they need help. And that's why we are fighting for policy change. In Delaware alone, reported hate crimes nearly doubled from 2018 to 2019. And we know it's just the tip of the iceberg because of the number of crimes that are never even reported due to the fear of not knowing where to turn, and whether turning to the authorities will just make things worse. And so we need a safe place for people to turn to report these crimes. And that is a primary function of a Division of Civil Rights and Public Trust. We are working hard to update our outdated hate crime laws to create new civil rights protections, including a law prohibiting, as I mentioned, the deprivation of our civil rights, to beef up our hate crime unit, and to improve community outreach to ensure that people know they can turn to us when they face violence or harassment because of a protected identity. Stopping hate and hate-related violence will require a great deal of commitment from all of us here this evening and all of us throughout our state. And that begins with clear lines of communication between us and everyone in the communities that we serve. I am grateful to all of you for joining this evening. I am grateful to Nicole, to Callum, to Charlotte, to Lori, and everyone here this evening who has really brought to light the devastation that hate brings on our communities and the fight we have to take up to prevent it. This year, attorneys general throughout the country, Democrats and Republicans alike, spent an entire year studying hate in America. It was an initiative called The People versus Hate. And we saw hate in so many different forms, from white supremacists to individuals who were acting alone, to groups hell-bent on committing violence against other people, not for what they did, but for who they are. And if we don't fight it in every form, then shame on us. And so the attorneys general nationally have taken up the cause. We need to take up that cause in Delaware as well by passing this legislation that will give people the protections that they need. Delaware to date is one of only a few states in the entire country that does not mandate the reporting of hate crimes into a single database. This law, this bill will change that. And this bill will modernize our hate crime statute, as Nicole Mosey will point out to you, to make it prosecutable in a much greater and more robust way than has historically happened in the state of Delaware. We have recently seen hate in our state that is frankly frightening for anybody who knows about it. There was an organization in our state called The Base, a far-right white supremacist organization that had members in Delaware, in Maryland, and as far away as Canada. Their sole purpose in organizing was to commit violent acts against others. And so it took the federal government, with the help of local governments like our office, to investigate, to root out, and to prosecute federally that group. They had plans to go to Virginia and attack people at a gun safety rally. And those plans were thwarted only because the government stepped in and did their job. It is incumbent upon each one of us to keep doing that kind of work. What we saw on January 6th in the halls of our Capitol was frightening, shameful, and very real manifestation of hate in this country. And the man who carried that Confederate flag into the halls of Congress lives in Delaware. There were several people arrested as a result of the insurrection in Congress that day. And thank goodness for the Capitol Police who stood their ground. But I will say this, it is going to take all of us to continue to fight against hate, to continue to uncover the evil aspects of these deep-seated, uneducated, quite frankly, acts of ignorance. Because people who commit these crimes often act out because they are afraid, they are ignorant, and that is they are not knowledgeable about the truth of other people and unwilling to see that we are a great nation because of our diversity. And so I will leave you all with this and answer questions that Lori may have for me. Let's all work together. We have to report it. When you see it, when it happens to you or to others, please report it, because we can't do our job unless citizens, everybody on this call and everybody in the state agree to band together to put an end to hate. Hate has no place in our state, and we need your help, and we need you to step up to report it so that we can protect all of the people of our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Kathleen Jennings. Important statements and words and work. I'm wondering, you talk about reporting it, so I'll throw a question back about that. Is there a hotline in Delaware? And since we have 75 people currently on the call, I don't want to miss this opportunity to talk about that if there is such a thing.
Yes, suspected hate crimes can be reported. If it is an instance where you believe a crime has been committed, you should contact 911. That is always the first avenue of redress. You can also express questions, concerns, or also report hate crimes to the Division of Civil Rights and Public Trust at 302-577-5400. And you can find additional information on our website. Nicole will point those means out to you when she speaks, but we just have to have our eyes open and see it. Nicole Mosey prosecuted a case not too long ago of an individual who pointed a gun at protesters. Protesters were exercising their constitutional rights. And this man pointed a firearm directly at them. That case got prosecuted because we worked really hard with law enforcement to make sure that that individual was held to account. That only happens when someone reports it. And people reported what they saw that day. So it's one instance where I can tell you it made a difference to have people come forward and have the courage to report that.
Thank you. And I want to share a question that just popped up in my head. It wasn't on the original list of questions, but I think you've raised something that's very important in your comments. And that is, the reason that people hold hate, the emotion of hate, and the belief systems that they do, the ignorance, the fear, and so on. And so I'm wondering if there are any programs currently that the Department of Justice is in concert with, like, the Department of Education in Delaware to educate our children and parents about, the value of humanity, about the value of love and benevolent community, and so on.
So I am sure that the Department of Education and school districts have such programs. A really important program in the state of Delaware is our anti-bullying efforts, because that's also a form of hate and ignorance. And what we learned is that certain people are routinely bullied in school, and just, they're kids. They don't want to tell their mother, they don't want to tell their father, they are reluctant to talk about it. And so we started a program a number of years ago. It was started, I believe, by my predecessors, and it continues to this day. And that is that housed in our office is a person who's an ombudsperson. And bullying complaints can be referred directly to him. His name is Bill McGillen. And he looks into every complaint, reaches out to the school, reaches out to the child's parents, loved ones, and tries to make sure that that child is protected. That's a very important aspect of the work that we do. He does a phenomenal job. For example, we learned that a Muslim community in our state whose children attend a public school were being routinely bullied. And, the children at first were not even telling their parents about it, but then did. And the community brought it to our attention, and Bill McGillen stepped in to try to help, to try to make things better. But it's also important for anyone who sees this to speak up in a school community. That is teachers, other parents, and other children who have the right to say, no, you can't do that to my friend. That's not okay. So I think we need a lot more education in this regard. And what we see is born of ignorance. Lori, I think you really said it aptly, which is there's an individual we studied, the attorneys general I mentioned, studying the People versus Hate. The first case in point that we looked into was a young man, I think his last name is Piccolini. Callum may know about his case. And he had joined a white supremacist skinhead group. He joined, he later renounced it, and he now goes around the country teaching people, how this came about, how this man ended up, this young guy, I think he was a teenager at the time, how he came about joining a group like that, and then what it took for him to leave it. The bottom line for him was he felt marginalized. He was not, I think, aware of the values that people have who may be different from him, that they're equal. And he just gravitated toward this group because he felt so much on the margins of life himself. And when he got out, he dedicated his life to teaching others how to avoid that same fate.
Yeah. An important story for sure, especially for our times currently. I am going to move on so that our other speakers have a chance to also share. And if you, Attorney General Jennings, have to depart, I want to thank you preemptively for taking the time at the end of what I'm sure is a long day to be here with us. We really appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure and honor to be among you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our Deputy Attorney General of the Division of Civil Rights and Public Trust, Nicole Mosey. And I feel like I know Nicole somewhat because I feel honored to sit on a roundtable conversation around this very topic with others in our state. Nicole Mosey is a proud Delaware native and graduate of the University of Delaware, go Blue Hens. While at UD, she double majored in political science, global studies concentration, and Spanish with a minor in psychology. After college, Nicole attended New York Law School, where she centered her studies on racial and social justice and public interest work. Committed to the fight for civil rights, Nicole currently works as a Deputy Attorney General for the Delaware Department of Justice Division of Civil Rights and Public Trust. In this role, Nicole investigates and prosecutes incidents, crimes of bias and hate, civil rights violations, public official misconduct, and law enforcement use of force cases. Prior to joining the Delaware DOJ, Nicole worked as an associate legal counsel for Governor John Carney, staff attorney at Delaware Volunteer Legal Services, Inc., and labor enforcement officer for the Delaware Department of Labor Office of Anti-Discrimination. She also dedicates time to the community by participating in outreach and advocacy efforts on various issues, including public policy, know your rights workshops, housing and employment discrimination, education, criminal justice reform, and voting rights. And it is my pleasure to turn the platform over to Nicole. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lori, for that wonderful introduction. I am so excited and honored to be here amongst this esteemed panel. And I have to give thanks to the Alliance, to the League of Women Voters, and of course to my boss, the Attorney General, for inviting me and allowing me to participate in this very important and much needed discussion. So I have a brief presentation today. There are three things I would like to address during my portion. The first is, let me see. Okay, I think I'm sharing all right. The first is what a hate crime is as outlined by the Delaware law. Second, what to do or who to go to if you witness or experience an incident of bias or hate. And then third, pending legislation, which has been referenced earlier in this presentation, but what Delaware has going on with our current law and our hope to modernize it. So really quick, the Division of Civil Rights and Public Trust is one of the 5 divisions with the Delaware Department of Justice. As the Attorney General mentioned, we are one of the newest divisions within the department. We have a very small team under the direction of Mark Denny, myself, Dave Skowronski, we have a public rights attorney fellow with us as well, and then a few other staff that handle all of what Lori mentioned: civil and criminal misconduct by public officials, law enforcement use of force, pattern and practice violations for civil rights, and then hate crimes, which we're here to discuss tonight. Now, what is a hate crime as defined by Delaware law? We turn to our Delaware Code, specifically the provision section 1304. Now, typically, I think when people hear the term hate crime, their mind may jump to an act that someone or a group of people have maybe targeted a person or another group based on a characteristic, whether it be race, gender, religion, some form of that. Well, our statute addresses that instance and another as well. The first instance that's outlined under our law is that hate crime is defined as someone who may interfere with the victim's free exercise or enjoyment of the First Amendment right. So that is in reference to our First Amendment rights with free speech, the exercise of religion, the right to peacefully assemble, all of those rights that I don't think that maybe our minds will automatically go to when thinking about the term hate crime. So that is the first instance that we currently have the authority to investigate and prosecute these hate crimes under. The second instance is what we may be more familiar with, is when an offender selects the victim because of who they are, when they may have one or more of the characteristics, like I mentioned earlier: race, religion, color, gender, disability, and more. So that's currently how our hate crime reads. We are looking to make some changes here, which I'll talk about momentarily. The way that we see these incidents manifest are typically in some form of a crime. Those crimes tend to be harassment. It could be threats, terroristic threatening of some sort, disorderly conduct, an actual physical assault on someone, destruction of property or trespass of some kind. And these are just to name a few. And then common victims or locations where these occurrences may happen: definitely a target on a particular person or maybe a group of people that share a commonality of sorts. We see hate crimes occurring at people's homes, both historically and present. Religious spaces. I think these are places that we probably are familiar with or can think of maybe one or two cases in the past where we've seen the crime play out in a location like we have listed here. So these are just some of the most common crimes and most common places and victims, but they're not the only. Now, what to do if you witness or experience a hate crime? And I want to put an emphasis on witness or experience, because as the Attorney General mentioned, it is very, very important that we have people come forward, not only if they have experienced something for themselves, but if they see another person who may be targeted or a victim to a hate crime or such act. So if you witness or experience an incident, the first thing you want to do is call 911. That is going to be the most immediate resource available to you. As you're talking with the officer who may respond, or maybe it's multiple officers, you want to try to take note of what was going on at that time. Where were you? What's the location? Who was involved? How many people were involved? Was it just one person? Was it a group of people? Try to pay attention to any particular clothing. Maybe you see colors, you could see symbols, some type of signage. You may not know what it is, but if you can describe it vaguely, that does give more information. It could lead our law enforcement into a direction of doing more investigation on what's going on. Try to take note of any surrounding vehicles, license plates, and all that as well. Now, I say that in the sense of this is what to do when you're faced with it, and we're human, right? Like things happen very quickly. We may miss certain details. So we encourage you to do this, but we also understand we're human, we have natural reactions. And so some of this you may not be able to capture, but try to remember to the best of your ability. Once you have taken note of that and you are talking to a responding officer, be sure to ask the officer to include that information in the police report. The details you shared about how many people, what colors you saw, what symbols you saw. That information, again, is going to be extremely helpful both to law enforcement and to our office once the news makes it to us about what happened. Now, aside from contacting 911 and speaking with the police officer, you definitely are encouraged, and we would love for you to contact the Division of Civil Rights and Public Trust. I dropped our contact information into the chat earlier. I will drop it again once I'm done talking tonight, but our office is designated to tackle these particular incidents and crimes. We've been doing a lot of outreach with our law enforcement agencies, going down to Delaware State Police training academies to try our best to educate officers who are going to be going out to the field to various law enforcement agencies on how we interpret and handle hate crimes as a division. So definitely reach out to us and feel free to share. You can contact us through phone, through email. Again, I will put that information in the chat in a moment. But other resources that are available, the Delaware Department of Justice, we have our Victims Compensation Assistance Program that particularly works with our victims. We can try to get you a social worker for additional support. There's also some regional and national resources available, such as the Victim of Crime Resource Center, the United States DOJ Hate Crime Collection, the Anti-Defamation League, as Callum has mentioned, has a host of different resources and educational materials available to the public. So all of these are great organizations and resources that are available to you. And if you're not sure where to start with us. Start with the Division of Civil Rights and Public Trust, and we'll point you in the right direction and make sure that you have what you need. Now, I mentioned that our hate crime is currently under what we hope to be a more modernized version with Senate Bill 144, which is currently pending in our General Assembly. I don't want to get too much in the weeds with this because we do have the primary sponsor with us, Senator Pinckney. So I want to make sure that she has the floor to expand on this bill. But a few things I do want to highlight. This is a bill that our division is very committed to. We took the time to really analyze and see how our hate crime law compared to other states and also compared to the federal laws. And there is a need to update and change. And so some of the updates that this bill would enable is that instead of focusing on an offender selecting a person with a particular intent, it opens that up for the person to be motivated in whole or in part. And it doesn't matter if they were correct, it can just merely be because of a belief or a perception. Regardless if that belief is correct, regardless if that perception is correct, that would be sufficient to hold a person accountable under the hate crime statute. We also have created avenues with this bill that would allow for civil remedies to be pursued. So let's say there's a criminal investigation, maybe there's something missing where we can't quite pursue a criminal prosecution of what happened, but we will hopefully have a civil avenue available under Senate Bill 144, where people, victims can then seek some type of accountability still just in the civil realm. And then that's something that, again, the Division of Civil Rights and Public Trust would be a part of. And one more thing I want to highlight is that, as the Attorney General mentioned, this bill would mandate reporting requirements for our law enforcement agencies. The only way we're going to get better at being more proactive when it comes to hate crimes is if we have the information that reflects what is accurately going on in our state. And the only way we get that is we get reports and data from law enforcement officers, from our office and otherwise, so that we know what is going on where, and hopefully tackle it from there. So here is our contact information for the Division of Civil Rights and Public Trust. Again, I'm going to put this information in the chat as well. The director is Mark Denny. I, myself, or Mark, feel free to contact us directly at our emails as listed. If you have any additional questions, if you're curious about if something could be a hate crime, whatever it may be, we want to encourage you that this is an open door and we are willing to receive whatever questions, concerns you may have. So thank you very much, and I will turn it back over to Lori.
Thank you so much, Nicole. All important information, and we'll hopefully be able to dig into that in just a few moments after I introduce our distinguished, one of our distinguished Delaware State Senators, Marie Pinckney. Senator Marie Pinckney represents the 13th District, which stretches from the Christiana River south to Red Lion Road and encompasses dozens of neighborhoods along Route 13. Raised by her great aunt in Wilmington and Newcastle, Pinckney graduated from Howard High School of Technology. She earned her bachelor's degree in social work from Norfolk State University and a master's degree in social work from Delaware State University. After graduate school, she began working at a treatment center for adolescents with mental health and substance abuse issues. She also became the foster mother to a teen mother and her young son for many years. Senator Pinckney currently works as a social worker case manager at Christiana Care. She has dedicated her career to advocating alongside families seeking quality health care, access to resources, educational support, and government policies that support them. Senator Pinckney became the first African-American LGBTQ+ person ever elected to the state Senate of Delaware in 2020. She is dedicated to fighting the negative impacts of racial and socioeconomic inequalities, as well as the stigmas and hurdles faced by formally justice-involved individuals and those with limited educational backgrounds. She currently serves as chair of the Senate Corrections and Public Safety Committee and vice chair of Senate Housing Committee and the Senate Agricultural Committee. She is a member of the Senate Health Committee and the Senate Environment and Energy Committee. Senator Pinckney also serves on the Capital Improvement Committee, which is responsible for writing the annual bond bill. She lives in Bear with her 4-year-old German Shepherd, Gandhi, love that name, and her 6-month-old cat, Penelope, AKA Penelope Penny. And it is my real honor to introduce Senator Pinckney.
Hi, Lori. Thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction. I'm sure Gandhi, who is right here, like always, is thrilled to have also made the introduction. So thank you so much for that. I am going to ask if it's okay if I start with something that's a little bit unorthodox, a little bit different, just because we've been talking about such a heavy topic, and I don't know if anyone else is feeling the weight of this topic the way that I am, but I'm just going to ask if we could just take 1 second and just close our eyes and just take a deep inhaling, cleansing breath for the weight of the topic that we've been talking about. So I'm just going to ask everyone to just close your eyes and just breathe in and out once or twice. Thank you. Between the introduction video and Column's presentation, which were both fabulous, I was just really feeling the weight of the conversation that we're having. And, you know, as advocates in such an important space, I think it gets really easy to kind of talk about these issues in a way that kind of removes us from them, because they're such important work that we must get done, but it's still a really heavy topic to talk about. I came in here with like a plan of things that I wanted to talk about, which is on my laptop right here. And then I, as everyone was talking, wrote like a whole nother page of notes. So I'm gonna do my best to stick to my 10 minutes. So I am very thrilled and honored to be the Senate Prime of SB 144, which is a modernization of our hate crimes bill. And our amazing AG and her DAG, Nicole Mosey, talked about the importance of the bill and kind of what it does. I'll run through that a little bit more too, just to kind of give it a little bit more depth, but they did an excellent job of introducing the conversation of the importance of this bill, which has successfully made it through the Senate committee, as well as the Senate floor, and is now waiting for a hearing in the House. It made it through the Senate chamber last year and is just waiting for its time to shine in the House. And so, as was already mentioned, we already have a hate crime statute in Delaware. And so SB 144 just modernizes that statute. It does that by also making clear that a person is guilty of committing a hate crime if they commit a crime that is motivated additionally, because we already have a statute, but it adds to that a person's sex, a person's age, their national origin, or their ancestry of a person's group. And it does not matter if that person actually belongs to the identified group. So, you know, I think about myself, right, as a triple threat, right? Like I'm a queer Black woman, so I got triple threats. I'm triple at risk for a hate crime, right? And so it doesn't matter if a person believes or does, or it does not matter if I'm actually queer, although I am. It doesn't matter if I am. If a person believes that I'm queer and they attack me because that I'm a queer person, then they are guilty of a hate crime, regardless of whether or not the person that they attack actually does identify as queer or as any other marginalized or identified group in this statute. It also adds in desecration, which I think is an important topic to talk about. So it talks about like desecration of burial places, of public monuments and structures, and some other pieces in there. And then something that Nicole, Deputy Attorney General Mosey, touched on was the creation of the opportunity for a civil remedy, which I think is really important, right? Like a person should have the ability to take direct action when something is done to harm them, to attack them. And so this bill adds into that. And then I also, and I have to give credit to our, one that always loves to give credit where it's due. And so I have to give credit to our amazing policy analyst, Taylor Hawk, who first brought this to my attention and wanted to immediately put it in the bill. And then, you know, it wasn't until Taylor kind of found that information. And then we later came back to find out that Delaware, excuse me, is one of very few states that don't have this reporting aspect. So Taylor was doing her research on this. And when she saw us file the bill, she was so excited about the filing of the bill, but wanted us to come back and amend it and add in a reporting element. And so that's what this bill does, so that the public will have access to see how often this is going on. I think it gets really easy to kind of say that that's happening over there, that's happening in that state, that's happening in that country, that's happening in that part of the US. It's not happening here. But as we have seen, like that is not the case. It is happening here. And so this will give the public an opportunity to see and be engaged in this really, really important conversation of hate crimes that are happening in our state. Ms. King spoke earlier and she said something that is kind of still sitting on my chest. She said that so many in our species have an aversion to love and an attraction to hate, which I thought was just so incredibly heavy to think about, how easy it becomes to, as MLK said, to go with the darkness, right? Like, hate can't drive out hate. Only love can do that. Light can't, darkness can't drive out darkness. Only light can do that. And so I think that there are groups of people who it becomes very easy to say that it becomes easy to move with this hating piece, right? And so I think having this really important conversation is so necessary. You know, in Column's presentation earlier, there was a group, I don't remember Column which group it was, but there was a group that you showed a picture of and it said, pain demands a response. And I thought that was so interesting to see that listed under a hate group that feels that way, because you can talk to so many advocates in any space who would tell you the same thing, that pain demands a response. And I think that what is important is how we respond. And so when I think about SB 141, when I think about the creation and the work that Decrypt does, that is a response, right? And so giving people an avenue to say something is going on, I need to report it, I need to protect this group, I think is the response that pain demands. And so it's such an honor to be working alongside people like Colum, people like Deputy Attorney General Mosey and the Attorney General and others that recognize that there are groups that need and deserve extra protection simply because they exist, simply because we unfortunately live in a country that has told us for so long and for so many reasons that we are not worthy of our existence. It is important and necessary for us to give Delawareans access to a space where they will be listened to and heard, and their concerns will be taken serious. I have so many notes on things that I want to talk about, so I'm trying to speed through it. The Attorney General talked earlier about the January 6th attack and thinking about that, but also in the fact that there was a Delawarean involved in that. But we can also talk about like the attempted kidnapping of Governor Gretchen Whitmer. There was also a Delawarean involved in that we just found out between last week and this week. Like, there's nothing coming of that. That person and all of those involved in that case were released. And so again, this idea that this isn't happening here is a fallacy that we really need to correct, and that Senate Bill 149 and Decrypt and organizations like ADL are recognizing that this does happen here, that there is imperfection everywhere, and that we need to create spaces and opportunity to address these kind of issues. I think is just so important. And then I think last thing that I wanted to talk about was something that the Attorney General said, that our nation is great because of the diversity. Today on the Senate floor, I ran a resolution. It was a simple resolution, just recognizing this week as Black Maternal Health Week, which we know is important because Black women are dying in childbirth and after childbirth. And if you know me, one fact that that most people know about me is that I'm a nerd, and I will almost always find a way to bring a book up in a conversation. And so I read a short passage from the 1619 Project, which I knew was a controversial book, but it had the information that I needed. And it talked about the differential treatment between Black people and white people in healthcare and where that history came from. And one of my colleagues said, I wish we could just leave race out of the conversation, right? And I think that is their position, number one, but thinking about that overall, I think is such a mistake. Because if we leave race, if we leave gender identity, if we leave sexual orientation, if we leave these pieces out of the conversation, we are erasing people. We are essentially doing the same thing that we have always done as a country, as a people, and erase the parts of people that kind of make them who they are. And that's not to say that all of who I am is just a queer Black woman. I'm a lot more than that. But my association with those parts of myself has shaped a lot of who I am. It has given me a cultural background. It has given me identity in the way I move through the world, in the foods that I eat, in the music that I listen to, in the way that I dress, in the way that I speak. And those parts of me and those parts of Colum and those parts of Nicole and those parts of you, Lori, are incredibly important parts of who we are. And so to leave those things out of the conversation is to essentially erase a person. And so I think that bills, again, like Senate Bill 149, agencies like Decrypt, organizations like ADL, create an opportunity to not only honor the whole individual, but also protect them, which is important, because it's one thing to say, you're okay, like who you are is okay, but like be okay over there, be okay away from me, keep your identities away from me. And it's a whole nother thing to say, I honor who you are and I'm going to protect who you are as well. And so I think that our opportunity, our ability to get Senate Bill 149 passed and to provide the extra supports to Decrypt and to ADL are our pledge, saying that I honor you and I'm going to do everything that I can as a state, as an organization, to protect you. And that's our pledge to the state of Delaware and to citizens of Delaware, that we're going to do those things. I'm gonna be quiet. I'm just kidding. One more thing that I want to say that I thought was really, really just kind of jaw dropping when you were presenting was the map that you showed, the first picture of the map where you couldn't even see, there were so many instances on that. You couldn't see the state of Delaware, New Jersey, or Pennsylvania, or Maryland, because the instances on the map were so massive that you couldn't see entire states under the bubble. And I think that we really need to be taking that serious and taking that into consideration about just how often these incidents are happening. And I know it gets really easy to say that that was just propaganda, but propaganda is kind of the first step to what leads to the actual incidences of these things occurring. And so we really need to be taking that seriously, and we really need to get Senate Bill 144 passed. Lori, thank you all for the opportunity to talk about this and to have this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And in the few minutes that we have left, I'm gonna just ask the panel to perhaps participate by responding to a couple of questions. One that I think, one is I want to say that the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, as I mentioned, shared a grouping of questions, and I just want to thank our wonderful, illustrious panelists for during the course of their presentations, they really responded to many of those questions. And so one of the things, beginning with Callum, that he raised, but I've heard a thread of this through each presentation, is the question of what is trending in terms of hate incidents and crime nationally, what is trending statewide, and how do we combat normalization of hate? Because I feel like I see that happening on a daily basis. So whoever, yeah, go ahead, Callum, jump in.
Into it. I think that's a really good question. Something I would, I guess, start with, especially when it comes to hatred and starting that kind of like cycle, is something that it does begin very young. And so people that are in these circles also understand that. There's a lot of individuals who I'll follow. You'll find out they could be under 18 years old and they're very vulnerable. I forgot, I think it was Attorney General who brought up the one case of Mr. Piccolini, who used to be in the white supremacist movement, who came out of it, someone who was brought in when he was a teenager. And so a trend that we've been seeing, it did dip down a little bit during the pandemic because campuses were closed, but we have seen a lot of propaganda targeting specifically college campuses. And I think part of that is the reason is because these groups know that that is a place to gain a lot of individuals into their movement. If we look at movements that are trending right now, the Proud Boys within their circles, also Patriot Front, which is a white supremacist group, they're pulling a very young group of people. They're pulling people in that might be a little more naive, or they might have other issues that are going on in their lives, and they're looking for an outlet, and these people are providing that outlet. And so I think in that sense, a big thing that we can do is kind of what I was saying before, is awareness. Patriot Front, in addition to being a youth-oriented white supremacist group, is also by far, from what we've seen, the group that posts the majority of posters, flyers, propaganda, and they're doing that specifically to get their word out and to pull people in. So being aware of these groups, being aware of it when you see it, whether that means taking it down, reporting it to your community leaders so they can be aware of their presence, those are really the first steps in providing awareness and to kind of preventing these groups from being able to pull people into their message.
Yeah, thank you, Callum. Senator Pinckney or Nicole, anything to add to that?
I really want to just speak to the how do we combat hate piece. And I've been thinking about this a little bit throughout the day of the idea of being the person to stop the joke. Right, because I think a lot of this starts with small jokes when you're in certain spaces, to see how far you will allow a person to go. And so being the person to stop someone from making offensive jokes, I think is really, really important to be, especially when it's among people that trust you, that you have a close-knit relationship with. And when you hear people making those uncomfortable jokes, the ones that like you kind of want to laugh because you know the person and you know that you believe that they're not filled with hate, but still it's like not sitting right with you. It's like to be the person to say, that made me uncomfortable, or like, where did you get that idea about this group of people? Or why do you think that way? Like to be the person, even in those uncomfortable situations, to call that out, I think is really important, especially when you have an intimate relationship with someone. I think is really, really important because you're giving them a safe space to say, what you're saying is not okay, and here's why, or what you're saying is making me uncomfortable, and here's why. She's not in the audience, so she can't kill me for saying this, but my best friend sent me a text message earlier, and she works for a pretty prominent company in the state, and she was on a meeting, and one of the people on the meeting was of AAPI descent. And there was another high profile person on the call that made a really crude joke about COVID and its relation to people of AAPI descent, right? And and I asked my best friend, like, well, how did that go? Did anybody say anything? And she said, even in her own guilt, she didn't say anything. And she said, everybody just kind of laughed it off and no one said anything, but I was really uncomfortable. And so those are the spaces where we have the opportunity to say, that's not cool. That's not okay. This is how hate crimes happen. This is how hate starts, and this is how hate perpetuates, I think is really, really important. And then also kind of to what Colin was just saying, right, about how young this stuff starts. Again, because I'm a nerd and I always like to shout out books or podcasts. There's a really interesting podcast. I know it's on Apple, it's probably on Spotify too, called American Jihadi. Which was just this really fascinating podcast, and I cannot remember the kid's name that it's based on right now, but it follows the life, I guess, of this teen who was basically pulled into to ISIS. And it talks about like his family life and how he got there, and like again how his loneliness, how his family dynamic and all of these things led him to this life that by the time he realized where he was too far into it and he couldn't get out. And so if you want to kind of explore that a little more, that podcast American Jihadi is a really, really great way to kind of get an up close story, because this journalist, who probably got way too involved and attached to this story, but this journalist follows that story really, really closely, and gets really close to the family to understand how this happened. And so that podcast is a really good way to kind of gather and understand that story. Lori, you're on mute.
Okay, I know. It was like not wanting to get unstuck. Nicole, is there anything else you would like to add to this part of the conversation?
Really quickly, I just wanted to drive home a point that Colin mentioned. This is not an issue that is foreign to Delaware. It is happening in our state right now. Just last month, I was driving to my home along Route 40, and I saw large signage of Patriot Front. Now, I knew there are symbols because I'm familiar with this topic, but I thought to myself, what about the fellow residents in this area or anyone who is traveling along Route 40 who sees this? They're going to think it's something related to politics, because the way that it presented very like election-like. And that was just last month. Now, within a day or two, those signs were taken down, but it's just an example of, we are not foreign to this. This is happening in our state. It is happening in our communities. And so the more we talk about it, the more we raise awareness, the better prepared we are to handle it.
Thank you. I could not agree more. And actually, since you brought up Patriot Front, I'm curious. One of the things that many of us with the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice and the League, different volunteers, have been watching closely is a group called Patriots for Delaware. And I don't know how familiar you are with that group, but I'm wondering if there's a connection, because I one time read an article that said a lot of these Patriot groups have a thread of connection. And the other thing that I just want to say that I personally find scary about Patriots for Delaware is that if you go on their website, they make themselves sound as though they're open to all and, completely a typical organization. But I have attended 2 of their public forums, just like being a fly on the wall in the back of a room. And what I can tell you is that the verbiage that they're using, the messaging, I think is scary and threatening and not normal. So I just want to open up that question to the group.
Yeah, I can go first again. So Patriots for Delaware, they're not associated with Patriot Front. We believe they're kind of like in this weird gray area space between kind of like the militia movement and these political groups. But I think you hit on a very important point, is the way they market themselves. And so when you first look at them, you don't think of them as an extremist group. You don't think of them having any sort of like extremist or wrong ideas. And they do that on purpose to bring people in, because if they had giant signs talking about them being anti-immigrant, anti-LGBTQ plus, or these sort of things, no one would show up. And so I think it's very important to notice that and be able to kind of like suss that out. And that's kind of what I was talking about in the presentation, is the symbolism and looking for the in-betweens between something that's going to be very explicit and something that is more hidden. And so groups like maybe Patriots for Delaware, I'm not extremely well known or well versed in them, but these groups can kind of also serve as gateways into more extremist ideas. So you start here with the smaller things, kind of conspiracies, and then it's not a very large leap to get more into the more extremist, aggressive, violent kind of rhetoric.
Yeah. Thanks, Callum. I think that's a really important point. I just want to give us a moment to Senator Pinckney or Deputy Attorney General Nicole Mosey for any, and to you, Callum, too. We're going to get ready to kind of close things out, but I just want to give you kind of like the last word. If you have some kind of wrap up that you want to leave us with, some morsels of wisdom as we all move forward in our work as advocates.
I'll jump in there. Thank you for that opportunity. One of the first things I want to do is respond to my girl Michelle Taylor in the audience and her question about how do we become more comfortable to speak up. And I think my answer for that is being uncomfortable and being okay with being uncomfortable, because it is awkward, it is uncomfortable. Even me, like as a state senator, like on the floor today, after I read that passage, and having that kind of dialogue with my colleagues, like there was a part of me that felt like, did I go too far? Was that the wrong thing to do? And it's okay to have those thoughts, and it's okay to wonder if you shouldn't have gone there, if it made the room uncomfortable, because it is uncomfortable, and these are difficult conversations to have, especially again if you're having them with people that you have some kind of relationship with, and it's okay to sit in that discomfort, but don't beat yourself up about it, because ultimately when you made the decision to call someone out, they're at home or somewhere else thinking about their discomfort as well, and wondering whether or not it was the right thing to do. And you may not get through to that person the first time, right? But like continuously making them reflect on their thoughts and where those thoughts come from is how you get to a person like the person that the Attorney General spoke of, who was so engaged in hateful organizations, and then is now the same person that's speaking out against it. Like there were steps that got them from point A to point B, and those steps were being uncomfortable and examining where those thoughts came from. And then I also wanted to be a nerd and recommend a book. It's called Small Great Things by Jodi Picoult. A little bit of a controversial book because people were upset that there was a white woman that was writing from the perspective of a Black woman. I'm gonna say that this book is worth the read because Jodi did her research on this book, so it's worth the read. And this book really explores the relationship between a Black nurse, a white woman who was giving birth, and her husband, who were both I don't think it was the KKK that they were a part of, but some significant hate group. And what I thought was interesting, and this kind of goes to that last question, is that one of the things that this new modern version of a hate group kind of talks about is that they accept anybody into their groups now, right? Like they're not just looking for white men with bald heads and tattoos all over them, right? Like if you are a Black person, a person of Latinx background, a person that identifies as AAPI, a queer person, any of these titles, but you're still willing to rock with their mission, they will accept you. They are looking for you. And so I think that it's really interesting to make sure that we're having this piece of the conversation, that these groups are now looking to recruit anybody who will further their mission and further their drive. And so this book, Small Great Things, talks about that. And that's an important part of the conversation too, is that these groups, because they recognize that, because some of them, not all of them, some of them are still out front with their hate, right? But because some of them recognize that if they want to recruit and retain new members, they have to transform their messages in the way that they're talking. Like it's a lot easier for anybody who feels alone, isolated, what have you, to fall into the group, fall into these groups. And so I think that's another important part of the conversation, is making sure that people who are isolated in any kind of way or othered in any kind of way and are looking for some kind of community, as we all are, because we are all human beings that crave interaction and community, like making sure that they're not falling victims to becoming parts of these hate groups, I think is really important to be keeping in mind as well. Again, thank you so much for just the opportunity to have such a really important conversation this evening.
Thank you. Nicole?
Yes, quickly, 2 points. First, we talked a lot about hate crimes occurring, I guess, in the context of people experiencing or seeing it in real time. I think it's important to also note that social media has allowed the occurrence of bias and hate incidents to exponentially increase. People are feeling very confident behind screens, saying and targeting whoever they would like for whatever reason. And so that is not any exception to how we are tackling hate crimes, to how our office prosecutes them. But I just want to take a moment that it's not only what we may experience in real life in real time, the internet and social media is also a part of this as well. And then finally, if you see something, say something. I cannot emphasize that enough. Whether it's something that you experience, whether it's something that you observe, reach out to us, reach out to your local law enforcement officer. I recognize that the responsibility is not only on our fellow residents, but it's also on me. It's on law enforcement to respond, to be understanding, to be patient, to be empathetic of what information and what experience you are sharing with us, and to handle that with care and attention. And that's something that we're pushing to do. It's going to be a collaborative effort, but I can commit to this group here today that that's what I'm here, and that's what I want to see happen amongst all actors who are involved with this cause.
Thank you, Nicole, Callum, Marie, and the Attorney General in her absence. This was a wonderful, wonderful beginning of a conversation. In closing out, I know I'm going to turn to Charlotte for final words, and there's an announcement, a community announcement by Joe Lawson. But what I first want to say, echoing back to something Charlotte opened with, and that is the value of love. And my work and the initiative of intentionality and courage in building benevolent community is really close to my heart. And I hope that as we move forward, we'll be able to build a movement in Delaware where we can bring our voices together. Because one thing I know is community, as Nicole mentioned, and everyone, is so important. And we need to really, all of us, not just our individual organizations, but all of us join together in an intentionality of building benevolent community and using our voices for good. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Joseph Lawson for an announcement, and then finally to Charlotte to close us out. Thank you to all of our panelists and all of you who hung in there with us in the audience. We will save, I hope, Calvin, we can save somehow the questions, and we will forward them along, and hopefully we can get some answers after this session together. So we haven't forgotten about the people who have shared questions. Joe?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, for some reason, my speaker, my video froze up. I'm not a ghost. But anyway, just take a quick second to announce or reinforce an announcement we made last month that SDRJ is doing a benefit concert on June 18th at Cape and Lopin High School Auditorium. We are bringing in the Chantels. The Chantels were the first major female group to break through in the late 50s, early 60s. They're still around. And they, if you don't remember, they had they were nominated twice to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They were on Rolling Stone's list of the top 500 songs of the decade, not a decade actually, ever. And so they're a major league group that we will be bringing here, and you can buy tickets at sdarj.org. That's our website. Tickets are going fast. This group is very popular, especially down here. So please, we'd love to have you there at the concert. Tickets are only $30 and $45. So go to the website and get them because they're not going to last. Thank you.
I want to say that all of us who are on this webinar tonight, we're very fortunate. We heard wonderful, hopeful things from all of you. And I am, on behalf of SDARJ, and I'll even speak for the league since I'm a member of the league, and all of the participants, thank all of you for your words. I want to make two comments. I think that Senator Pinckney talked about how do we deal with uncomfortable moments. And there are good programs. SDARJ has something called Dialogue to Action, where we help people. And it's a program developed by the YWCA in Delaware, where we help individuals learn to speak up and speak out and go beyond the discomfort and reach that level of courage that I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation and confront immediately what needs to be confronted. Those innocent remarks that lead to just further development of hatred. I also want to comment that we talked a lot tonight about hate. We did not talk about love. And yet I think that what all of the great minds had in common, going back to the Greek philosophers, that it is the only weapon that we have. It is the only weapon. And if we could put as much energy in talking about love as we do about hate, it might be a nice experiment. But I'm just pleased that we had this conversation. I hope we continue the conversation and increase our focus on the proactive, via love way of diminishing the hate that we see that unfortunately tends to be growing because it's been normalized. So thank you again on behalf of all of us, and we'll see you at the Chantels concert. Good night.
Good night. Thank you again.
I want to say that all of us who are on this webinar tonight, we're very fortunate. We heard wonderful, hopeful things from all of you. And I am, on behalf of SDARJ, and I'll even speak for the league since I'm a member of the league, and all of the participants, thank all of you for your words. I want to make two comments. I think that Senator Pinckney talked about how do we deal with uncomfortable moments. And there are good programs. SDARJ has something called Dialogue to Action, where we help people. And it's a program developed by the YWCA in Delaware, where we help individuals learn to speak up and speak out and go beyond the discomfort and reach that level of courage that I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation and confront immediately what needs to be confronted. those innocent remarks that lead to just further development of hatred. I also want to comment that we talked a lot tonight about hate. We did not talk about love. And yet I think that what all of the great minds had in common, going back to the Greek philosophers, that it is the only weapon that we have. It is the only weapon. And if we could put as much energy in talking about love as we do about hate, it might be a nice experiment. But I'm just pleased that we had this conversation. I hope we continue the conversation and increase our focus on the proactive, via love way of diminishing the hate that we see that unfortunately tends to be growing because it's been normalized. So thank you again on behalf of all of us, and we'll see you at the Chantel's concert. Good night.